Now, to take this discussion further, India and SA ties further, we are joined by senior researcher from the Institute of Global Dialogue, Dr. Philani Mthembu. Good morning to you, Doctor, and thank you so much for joining us here on Ground Report this morning. Some people are saying that this discussion or conversation between the Prime Minister and President Jacob Zuma is long overdue. Would you agree with that?
Well, you might say it's long overdue, but remember that Modi was only elected in 2014.
Correct.
And last year there was a huge conference in India, the India-Africa Forum, which was quite a successful one, managed to invite 42 leaders from across the continent, South Africa, of course, being among them. But you have to also understand that there are ongoing ties at ministerial levels between these two countries. They relate whether it's within the BRICS, they relate whether it's within the G20, they relate also in terms of the IPSA. So these countries are in constant contact, and one could see this visit actually as a follow-up to the previous India-Africa Forum Summit, a very successful one for that matter. And obviously, it's not just about South Africa. South Africa is a very strategic country, of course, for India, but it's within the broader African context of India trying to solidify its relations with the continent.
Now, put it into perspective for South Africans who are sitting at home and thinking, why is this relationship and these discussions so important for our country? Firstly, expand on the relationship between India and South Africa.
Well, you have to understand firstly that India was one of the first, if not the first, countries to actually boycott the apartheid regime. India played an instrumental role as a member of the non-aligned movement, as a member of the G77, basically advocating positions of the global south, taking an anti-colonial position which put itself actually which actually compromised its own position in global politics. So it stuck its neck out in the most difficult times for South Africa. And one could see, you know, the situation now as obviously much improved. Today, these countries are emerging powers. They have major issues basically to discuss in global politics, whether it's the reform of the United Nations, whether it's bringing issues of development within the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, whether it's through the climate talks, but also through India's position, exceptional position as part of the nuclear members, if you may say. I mean, India is not a member of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. However, because of the unilateral move by the United States in actually granting it some kind of an exemption, we have to understand that you know, these are some of the issues that will be dominating the talks.
And what do you say to some individuals who say that this meeting is here for discussions with regards to that nuclear suppliers group or that board? What would your reaction be to that?
Well, look, previously, actually even earlier in the year, the president of India and also the foreign minister of India, they've already been making trips throughout the continent, and they have been discussing. So in Ghana, you had discussions. In Namibia, you had discussions specifically on the nuclear issue. It is an important issue for India because you have to understand the current special position India has, or at least the exception that India has been given in terms of not joining the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It's through a unilateral move by the United States. That means that the United States essentially could withdraw that at any time if it chose to. I don't think it would in the immediate term, given the strategic nature of the relationship and also considerations of China. But I think it's important for India to gain support within the global south. And South Africa is obviously quite a pivotal country in terms of garnering support globally, but also more specifically within the African continent. Because in terms of the nuclear non-proliferation treaties, South Africa also played quite an instrumental role in terms of the Pelindaba Treaty, which basically is Africa's version of the non-proliferation treaty. So I think it's important for India to get South Africa's endorsement in that regard.
Now, we do know that the Prime Minister has just we landed in South Africa from Mozambique. We'll continue that conversation a little bit later. But earlier we saw President Jacob Zuma and the Prime Minister emerge at the Union buildings. There was huge pomp and ceremony, and then they went into discussions behind closed doors. What do you think was at the top of the agenda during those discussions?
Well, I definitely think, firstly, it's a follow-up to last year's India-Africa summit. But I also think they obviously should have discussed the nuclear issue. I mean, it is an important issue on the topic, on the agenda rather. But also, I think issues that they could be possibly discussing involve the IPSA. The IPSA has really been relegated, and that's the India, Brazil, South Africa, platform, which was really seen as a platform for emerging powers, but at least democracies from emerging powers. It has been taken over by the BRICS, and we haven't had a summit of the IPSA since 2011. And it doesn't seem to be high on the priority for Brazil. Not sure if it's on top of the agenda for India. South Africa officially says it is important, but we haven't seen any movements regarding the IPSA. And of course, an issue which should have come up is the India hosting of the BRICS summit in October. India is hosting it following Russia hosting it last year. So I do think, some of the critical issues there will be discussed. Something that may not be officially on the agenda, but which has become important of late, is, India and the African continent have been growing people-to-people relations. So India have been sponsoring a lot more scholarships for African students. They've also been training a lot more professionals within the continent from the civil service and so forth. And this year has actually, that people-to-people relations has been marred by xenophobic attacks in some Indian cities towards African immigrants. We recently saw the Minister of Foreign Affairs in India meeting with her counterparts, her ambassadors within India, and to basically try to, to calm them down and reassure them that the Indian government is on top of this. And that was following a Congolese student actually being killed in India. So that might not officially be on the agenda, given that these two leaders will probably be speaking high politics when they meet. But I do think it's some of the issues which come up when countries and in our case, not just South Africa, but the African continent, when they deepen relations beyond the economic and the political, to also including people-to-people relations.
Now let's expand on the topic of relations. There's been a lot of talk about the imbalance in trade relations between South Africa and India. Is there an imbalance, and what can be done to correct those? Will those discussions be taking place as well?
Well, those will be taking place. At the previous address by South Africa's own Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, she addressed a few months ago a business delegation in India. And she was basically stating that at that time, I mean, ties, at least trade ties between South Africa and India were sitting at around 15 billion US dollars, and that they would be looking to increase those, to 20 million by 2018 was the date that was given. Trade imbalances are not uncommon in global politics, or at least in global trade. You may have imbalances with some countries, but with other countries, you obviously benefiting more. What's important, I think, for South Africa is to really look at what India has been doing. Right now, there's an initiative that Prime Minister Modi championing within India, which is this Make in India initiative, where they're trying to obviously produce more goods within India and make India not just a services center, because we know that India, in terms of the services industry, is one of the leaders globally. But they're trying to make India also a manufacturing power within the world. And we know that prices have been increasing in China. We know that China's economy is currently restructuring, and they're moving out a lot of their excess production to the region, but also beyond that to some African countries. So India sees this as an opportunity. India has a large population, which is said to overtake the population of China, if it has not already overtaken it by now. And it also has relatively low costs in terms of the labor market. Now, this creates opportunities for India to increase its share of manufacturing and production globally. This aligns quite well with what South Africa is also trying to do. South Africa is also trying to industrialize. We are, compared to many economies on the continent, we are relatively industrialized, but there are concerns that South African economy is de-industrializing. So I think there's lessons to learn from India in terms of how they are going about doing that. And of course, low-cost production. India is very good at low-cost production. They've recently manufactured a cell phone which will cost, a smartphone which will cost a fraction of what smartphones are on the market.
Yeah.
And that's obviously going to revolutionize the industry. We need to learn how they're managing those processes.
So a lot to be learned.
Definitely.
Well, thank